everyone. I'm gonna share my screen and make sure that's working, and then I will introduce myself and the session. So if you can bear with me for 1 second, let's make sure we're all set up and ready to go. Hang tight. Sherelle, is that working? Great, brilliant. Hi, I am, and I'm just gonna make this one a little bit smaller so there's less people on screen. No offense, you are all lovely. Hi, so as Sherelle said, I used to live in LA for 10 years, so I have known Ari and CSP for a very long time, but I had to move to England to actually present for the first time, so I'm very, very excited to be here. It's a wonderful program as the 900th and something session that we're doing, which is an incredible number. As you said, I live in London. I'm a rabbi and creative producer, and I've had the absolute pleasure over the last year of working on a 60th anniversary production of Fiddler on the Roof. That has been a simply extraordinary success. And what I want to talk to you about today is about the process of adapting this incredibly loved musical that is beloved all around the world, which people relate to in all different ways from all different cultures and backgrounds, but is also a uniquely Jewish story, talking about a uniquely Jewish experience and how that has been adapted successfully in this current moment in time when I think there's a lot of fear and worry and concern about what it means to be presenting Jewish stories publicly. And this is a really wonderful example of how successfully and sensitively and brilliantly that can be done in this moment. So this is called Tradition, Adapting Fiddler on the Roof for today. She says, and everything now seems to be stuck. So hold on, here we go. Okay, great. So as many of you know, I'm sure almost everyone on this call has seen Fiddler on the Roof, if not once, but many, many, many times. It is the first, the original Broadway production started in 1964. It is the first musical theatre run in history to surpass 3,000 performances. Well, I said this is an extraordinarily loved musical. It is based on the original short stories by Shalom Aleichem, Tevye the Dairyman, which are slightly tonally different, but no less brilliant for that. Music by Jerry Bock, lyrics by Sheldon Harnick, book by Joseph Stein, director choreographer Jerome Robbins, and that's where a lot of the things that were created for part of this, the bottle dance, the iconic bottle dance, are still very much the core of what goes on in the show. There so far have been 5 Broadway productions of Fiddler on the Roof, which is a huge amount, not to mention the countless productions worldwide and in the West End. Again, just an absolutely extraordinary endeavor. And obviously the first original star was Zero Mostel, who played the original Tevye, which is, you know, the book's Tevye and the Milkman by Shalom Aleichem. And many of us over time obviously have experienced different people playing Tevye. When I first moved to LA, and I think actually maybe a CSP event, I was very privileged to spend quite a number of sessions and events around for the last couple of years of his life with Theodore Bickel, who I know for many people, particularly in LA, is also as much the Tevye to them as Topol and Zero Mostel may have been. So a real honor there. So that's the original Broadway production. Sorry, I'm not sure why this, there we go. Oh, we'll get there eventually. And then of course in 1971, it was adapted for film with Chaim Topol playing Tevye. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, of which it won 3, including Best Cinematography and Best Sound. This is, of course, the iconic moment in most people's memories of what this thing is. They remember Tevye singing, they remember Topol singing If I Was a Rich Man. I think all of us at some point in our childhood were shown this by a relative, and it becomes the foundational text and the starting point for so many conversations of what it means to be a Jew in community, of what it means to be a Jew who has a family story of immigration, of persecution. It becomes the starting off point for conversations about intergenerational dynamics, about what it means when someone maybe marries outside of the faith. It really is, I think, for many people, a sort of foundational Jewish text, in as much as, you know, hearing the Torah and Shabbat and everything else, like for many secular Jews, Fiddler on the Roof is right up there with the stories we tell about ourselves and the stories we tell about our community. This, in many ways, and of course for Ashkenazi Jews, is a central text. And of course, it echoes the Jewish experience more broadly. You didn't have to come from Ukraine to recognize what it means to have your neighbors turn on you and to experience persecution. You don't have to come from Ukraine in 1905 to know what it means to face migration, to face challenges of assimilation, to face what it means when your children want different things and dream different things than you do. So it really encompasses so many of the things that we still talk about today. So this brings us to now. So last year, and obviously this conversation started quite a lot beforehand, Regent Park Open Air Theatre, which is a magnificent theatre in London, in Regent's Park. It's been open for 92 years, wanted to honour the 60th anniversary of Fiddler on the Roof, with a production of Fiddler on the Roof. And they had this plan for a while. And this is no secret that after October 7th, there was a big conversation amongst the staff and amongst the people who run the theatre about, is this okay to go ahead and show this? And it is this a moment where people maybe will be fearful about telling stories, Jewish stories? This is a moment where people maybe won't want to engage with Jewish stories. Is this going to become a site for political activism? And they were asking the right questions, and thankfully they came to the right answer, which is this is absolutely the time to be telling Jewish stories, and it's absolutely the time to be engaging with the Jewish community and creating a piece of work that both speaks to that community and for that community, but also allows people from outside of that community to come in and experience that story, and also is both specific but also universal, that we know that people from all different backgrounds can relate to, and that in itself creates those pathways for conversation and dialogue. So they went ahead, and thank goodness they went ahead, because it ended up being the fastest selling show at the theatre in its 92 years history. It was completely sold out, and it ended up having an extended run, which is absolutely fantastic. It's also unusually for a show at an open air theatre in the UK. They were able to do, I think, all but 2 performances. The weather stayed perfect and intact for about 10 or 12 weeks. And with the exception of a bit of rain here and there, and 2 nights, they were able to perform every show, which is, I think, also a small minor miracle and record within the theatre's history as well. And you can see that this was just simply the most extraordinary setting for a show to be in this outside space. And we'll get into it, but in this context, they built something that sort of took Anatevka and took the show and turned it into something that had simply never been done before. That was in 2024, last summer. Since then, it has gone on to win 3 Olivier Awards, which is the equivalent of the Tony Awards in the UK. So you'll see here the cast celebrating. It won Best Musical Revival, it won Best Set Design, and it won Best Sound Design. This is I love this photo so much. It's just a moment of pure unbridled joy with the cast, who have in many ways like a family for me. I will also say that in a year where everyone was worried and concerned about anti-Semitism in the arts and very real concerns that are really affecting the Jewish community and the Jewish arts community in the UK. In the same year that we are increasingly concerned about that, there was also this Olivier Awards, in which Fiddler on the Roof won Best Musical Arrival, and 2 awards. Giant, which is a brilliant play that explores Roald Dahl's anti-Semitism through the lens of both his character, but a couple of Jewish characters who were also part of that conversation. An extraordinary play written by a guy called Mark Rosenblatt, who's a Jew from Northwest London, who is so local and so much past the community that my daughter goes to school with his niece. And I grew up with his brother. So it really is, he won Best New Play. There was also several other awards that went to Jewish writers, Jewish theatre directors, Jewish Jewish content plays. So you have this sort of extraordinary moment where Jewish stories are really being celebrated on the stage and finding great success there with audiences. And it is in stark contrast to some of the reactions and issues that we're seeing in other parts of the arts world. So I want to just sort of hold those two things, which are sort of true at the same time and happening very much here and everywhere else, but also real sort of moments of hope and Jewish joy and the sort of recognition of sort of great Jewish artistry. So incredibly successful production. A masterclass, Jordan Fein and Fiddler. That's Jordan Fein's the director, and Fiddler are a match made in heaven. That was the Telegraph. A showstopper speaks of the present, sublime, the Guardian. Jordan Fein's revival is a triumph of truth. The Stage, a potent evening that's hard to forget. The Times, that's the London Times, not the New York Times. I'm sure the New York Times would love it as well. Liberating, exuberant, hugely moving, the Evening Standard. So the just universal extraordinary praise for this show in almost exclusively across the press. And now it is transferred and has been running since May at the Barbican, which is a West End venue, although slightly further east, an extraordinary building in and of itself, the Barbican Centre. If you're ever in London, you get a chance to go. It's a sort of wonderful brutalist masterpiece. And then it's heading out on a national tour. And the Barbican show has, again, been almost completely sold out, is sold out. It ends next week. And then they're going off on the national tour, which is also in many ways a real test of the success of this production and people's appetite for these stories. It's going all over England and to Ireland. And again, ticket sales have been extraordinarily high and enthusiasm for it is really great. So again, what is it about Fiddler that really attracts audiences far and wide and not just from the Jewish community? And particularly in this moment, what is it telling us about the power of Jewish stories? So why has this been so successful? So I'm going to start with one, I want to acknowledge Regent's Park and the Barbican for really putting their weight and their brilliance and their staff behind it. But I also, of course, have to start with the magnificence of the creative team. So we have Jordan Fein as the director. Jordan is an extraordinary director who previously had done Oklahoma. He was involved in the new Cabaret, which has won Tony Awards and is now in New York, and won plenty of Olivier Awards here, which is phenomenal. And what Jordan did is he made a really conscious decision to work as much as possible with Jewish creatives and a Jewish cast. So not everyone involved in it is, but where possible, he really brought that team together to reflect the full breadth of Jewish heritage and Jewish ideas. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But he had fantastic musical supervisors, Julia Chang, who is the choreographer, who is simply extraordinary. Tom Scott, who is the designer, he's also Jordan's partner. He has won Tony Awards for Cabaret. He just won the Olivier for, and has previously won the Olivier Cabaret and has just won the Olivier for Fiddler on the Roof. And I brought here at the end two people, one of whom is me, the Jewish culture, religion, and history consultant, and a woman called Yurit Dor. And I've included this. We are probably the least significant people within that creative team, but I've shown us there as opposed to other people, because I think nowadays there is a real understanding that when you create a play or a book, a play or a TV show or a film, and there is intimacy or fighting, that you bring on an intimacy director, that you bring on vocal coaches, that you bring on people who will work closely with the team in these moments where there's potentially friction or people need additional help. What is extraordinary about Fiddler on the Roof and this production is that they took this even further and they said, we are making a show about the Jewish community, about Jewish culture, Jewish heritage in a moment where that is being misunderstood or challenged, misrepresented. And what we want to do is think very consciously about how we tell the story. So they sought out someone, in this case, thankfully me, to be their Jewish culture, religion, and history consultant, which is one of the great privileges and joys of my life. But really, I think was beneficial for everyone We were able to run workshops. I was there to be able to answer questions. I was there to work before rehearsals even started with Jordan as he tried to craft moments within the show that felt authentic and accurate, that felt that sort of elevated the Jewishness of the story without derailing ideas that he had as a director for characters, and how can we take these ideas that he had for the characters and make them feel rooted in what might have been historically accurate or sort of spiritually accurate, and it was just an absolute joy to have those conversations. And I think really I know enrich the experience of the cast and the company in that it gave them permission as well to have those conversations, and it gave the people in the cast and the company who are of Jewish heritage the permission to ask questions about their identity, to use this as a process of exploring their own identity in the context of the story of Fiddler and the context of presenting this show to the world. And for non-Jews within the creative team and the creative cast, they felt that they had permission to ask questions about anything really about the Jewish experience, and know that that would actually, again, be, answered and received, and they wouldn't be made to feel sort of awkward and go through this experience not actually knowing what was happening. So it made for just a really enriching experience for everyone. This is Jordan in this photo here, in the process of directing people. And as I said, we also had this incredible cast. Many of these people did both Regent Park and also the Barbican. Adam Danheiser, who is known on Broadway, came over and did Tevye. Lara Pulver, who many of you may have seen in movies and TV shows. If you've ever seen the first season of the wonderful adaptation of Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch, she plays I've forgotten what her name is, but the woman who steals the letters that Sherlock sort of falls madly in love with, and it's the one woman who got away. Also, obviously, a very well-known character in the books, and it would come to me at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I would go, oh! But she's in that, and you'll recognize her. Then there was Liv Andrusa and Natasha Jules Bernard. Liv did the Regent's Park, and Natasha's been doing the Barbican as Seitel. Georgia Bruce as Hoddle, Hannah Bristow and Heather, and Raphael Papo, and I'll talk more about them along the way. But you'll see here this wonderful, this is a grouping of the cast together. This is them doing the horse mule moment. And just, as I said, almost everyone in this shot, in fact, I believe everyone in this shot, because they are the people representing the Jewish community here, are of Jewish heritage. And again, that led to a really powerful moment because people were telling their stories. For some of these people, this was the first time that they had been able to this is the first time that they had, sorry, Irene Adler. Thank you, Irene Adler. This is the first time, oh gosh, where have I lost them again? Hold on. Let me come back. This is the first time that many of these people had been able to connect with their own Jewish heritage as well. So it really created this wonderful community. Of these people in the cast, what's wonderful is there are people here who also represent different gender identities and different sexualities. And that was also something that was sort of taken on board both in the costuming and in the staging and in the representation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So just to tell you a little bit more about some of the members of the cast, this is Adam and Lara in the top playing Tevye and Golda. In the left-hand corner here, we have Beverly Klein playing Yenta. Beverly is an extraordinary British actress. This is her third or fourth production of Fiddler. When she was very young, she was in it as one of the daughters. Then she's played Golda twice, and now she has reached the period of her life where she comes on as Yenta. So she plays an extraordinary Yenta that again was actually nominated for an Olivier Award for Best Supporting Actress. So again, Adam's family have a story that echoes the story in the show. His family are also Ukrainian Jews. Some of them ended up here in London and actually go to my synagogue, and some of them ended up in the US, in New York. Lara is of Jewish heritage through her father and did not have much Jewish experience and culture in her life growing up. So for her, this experience of being in Fiddler in the Roof was something that deepened that connection and was sort of the most Jewishly engaged and she's been able to be in her adult life. And so that was again a really sort of powerful transformative experience for her. to play Golda and to hold that space to connect with her own identity. We have here, I'm going to talk a little about staging alongside the cast as well. So we have here the three daughters, Hava on the left, Seitel in the middle, and Hoddle. This is them during Matchmaker. You'll notice the members of the people sitting behind them. So what is extraordinary about this production and something that makes it really special is this production both centers the stories. This photo is great for articulating that. It both centers the stories of the women. And actually what is beautiful, they wanted to foreground the stories of the daughters, and also Golda. So when many productions, sort of Golda is very shrewish, the daughters are a bit can often seem a bit sort of tropey and sort of just standing up for ideas rather than fully rounded. That in sort of bringing them forward, Lara's Golda is not a shrew. You can get the sense of a sort of woman who is sort of sympathetic and wise, and sort of life has led her, she's in this position. But there's a wisdom and a wit there that is sometimes lacking for other productions. What we've also got with the daughters is you have here Seitel, who's extraordinary, but you will notice, you don't see it so much in the picture, in the costuming, like Georgia here identifies as non-binary, so the costuming and the character of Hoddle has taken on some of those elements of the way they dress, the way they present themselves, is as part of G's personality and G's relationship to their Jewishness and their Jewish identity and how they navigate that as a non-binary person. Similarly, we'll see with Hava later on, who's on the far left, played by Hannah, things from her life are brought to the fore in the way that the show is staged and the way the character is presented. And as I said, if you look in the background, you'll see that there are cast members just sitting around. And what is amazing about this production is that everyone who's not in the scene is on stage. Almost everyone is on stage the entire time. So what you have in this production is an extraordinary sense of the community of Anatevka being present and being part of is never distant from the experience that the main characters are having. So it is as much about the story of Tevye and his daughters, and at the same time, you never lose sight. This is a story about a community that is being threatened by outside forces that may not always get on, but is sort of a constant, loving, contentious part of everyone's life, that you cannot escape it. That when they're sent into exile and they have to leave, they're not just leaving the place, that they are leaving they are leaving this thing that is greater than it's articulated in the song Out in Tepka, but they're leaving something that is greater than the homes above them. But these are people whose lives have been sort of interwoven and interlinked at every point of their existence, and that is just taken from them. This is a story as much about community as it is about Tevye. And I think that staging of it and taking and pushing that community to the fore and pushing the personalities and the identities of the actresses and the actors playing the characters to the fore, you created something that is so incredibly accessible for the audiences who come to see it. Everyone recognizes something about themselves, and everyone can see that loss of a community. Everyone is seeking community, particularly in this moment, and to see one that is so vibrant, that is sort of destroyed by outside forces, is deeply powerful as an experience as a viewer. And as I said, like this is a rehearsal room. This is then Mottel getting his new wherever possible, the whole community and the entire cast is on stage engaging with it, with a few exceptions, the people who play Russian 1, Russian 2, and other named Russians. Everyone else is just there at every point. And you'll notice also there is a man with a fiddle in the background as well, and that becomes very important as well. So the community is there at every time. And as I said, here is the moment where Hava is cast out. And even then, it's the casting out is not just the father, but the community is present on the stage for that moment. That everyone becomes sort of complicit in their desire for tradition, their unwillingness to change. And Tevye in many ways is the one person in the village, other than the daughters, who is willing to change, but in their willingness to sort of desire to keep things as they were, they all become complicit in the sort of shunning of Hava. So there's the joy of community, but also the sort of the dangers of a community that is also too fixed. It really wonderfully shows both aspects of that, of how a community is both the most magnificent thing, and if you are somehow outcast from it, a sort of deeply traumatic and challenging thing as well. I want to talk about the design because it's simply extraordinary. It rightfully won Best Set Design. The challenge, taking the challenges of what it means to stage this outdoors. Tom took this and ran with it in the most amazing way. So first off, he created, the whole thing takes place as though it's in a hayfield, as in you're surrounded by wheat. You get the sense of Anatevka. So if you is in this arc is in both the village but also the countryside. Of course, you have the trees. You also have weird things like, because they are outside, you'll suddenly have helicopters flying over and all sorts of things. And that sort of became part of, you're in Anatevka, but there's this whole other world outside it. You sort of really experience that as well. But if you look, you'll see this is all real wheat. It's all sort of, it's been treated so that it doesn't, but it's in mud. There are mice in there. There's mice in the ones at the Barbican as well. I went on the stage the other day, and apparently they have a mice problem. That the mice have slowly died off when they ate the wheat and they got the toxins, but they've slowly become resilient to it. So now they have the mice are back, and they are standing under this wheat field. So it's the wheat to the side, and then on the top of this incredible roof that Tom created, that if you see has the words Anatevka written on the top, and then there's also Anatevka on the bottom. So it symbolizes the whole village is above you, is sheltering you, and also underneath. And it very consciously also echoes the idea of a sukkah, of a shelter. So it is both a shelter, Anatevka is a shelter, but as a place that is deeply vulnerable. So it is protecting them until the moment it can no longer protect them. So this echoing of Jewish themes and ideas is and taking the sort of the possibilities of this outdoor space and the vulnerabilities presented by that and rooting it in such a Jewish concept of the sukkah, of the sort of protective clouds that cover the Israelites in the desert, and making that Anatevka is really I mean I just people's brains are amazing, and Tom has done something extraordinary. I can see a hand has been raised, so if you need to ask a question, please send it to Sherelle, and I hope to be able to answer it later. I also want to there's this sort of stage that goes up to the top here, so people could come in and out, but it was an absolutely magical set, and they were able to do the following thing with it as well. So as the second act ends and there's a pogrom, they literally made it look like the wheat fields were on fire. It was unbelievably dramatic. You were sitting there and suddenly the fire started, the fiddler was up there, and this sense of like absolute vulnerability. We know that the cast had been sitting there, the musicians are playing live and they're sitting underneath. So this sense of like you were walking out for the interval and the place was burning behind you. It was simply extraordinary, and something that the outdoor really lent itself to. One thing I also want to note is that with the staging of it outside, they were able to time, at least for the first month, the sunrise sunset literally as the sun was setting. So you had this extraordinary scene with the chuppah and them seeing sunrise sunset as you were experiencing that moment in time. A truly, truly extraordinary thing. When they moved it to the Barbican, they obviously had challenges of space. They couldn't create this sort of big sweeping thing. They were no longer outside. So what they did instead, and what Tom came up with, and this is a very special rendering that I was sent beforehand. So the set now exists at the theatre. What they did is they took the same idea, the hayfield and the wheat, and they created this moving roof. So depending on the scene, and the fiddler spends a lot of time up there, the roof would come up and down. But when they got to the wedding scene, the roof came down, and Anatevka, the shelter around the teva, became the chuppah. So it's no longer echoing the sukkah, but it is echoing the protective canopy, the place under which people experience joy and look to the future. And it comes down, and then it brought poles in, and that became the staging for the wedding scene. And it really is incredibly powerful to watch this thing come down, and to recognize that that is what is happening. And again, to see those words, Anatevka, at the top, and know that just as that wedding scene ends in sort of horror as the pogrom starts, that the huppah, with the best of will and intention, just as a marriage is fragile, so too Anatevka is fragile, and the symbolism is just simply extraordinary. Again, you have the musicians playing at the back. You can see them at all times. They're in costume with everyone else. And of course, what you can't see is the mice that now live very happily in the hay, having become resistant to the toxins that treat it. This structure is incredibly heavy. It's going on tour. It's a huge thing that they're having to sort of, special fans break it up, but the whole thing is sort of one giant piece of mud and wood, and incredibly heavy, and it's going all over England and Ireland with them when they tour later in the year. I want to talk about the costumes. We have here a great example. So I mentioned earlier how G, who plays Hoddle, who is next to Golda, Golda is far left. Might be far right on your screen. I assume it's far left. But Hoddle, you can see what looks like the skirt is actually pants. And again, echoing both Hoddle, who becomes a sort of adventurer and goes off to Siberia and runs away, and doesn't run away, but chooses a life that is completely different from the norm and what was expected. That is represented through the costuming. One thing I wanted to mention that I didn't when we talking about the cast is that there was a conscious decision as well, made by Jordan and the creative team, that all the actors involved would speak with their own accent. So there's often productions of Fiddler where everyone's doing a sort of faux shtetl accent, and this time they thought, we have a Jew from New York, we have another Jew from somewhere, and I think also Michael, who plays Laser Wolf, is also originally from New York. We have Jews from Scotland. We have Jews from all different parts of England in this show. They made a choice that people will speak with their own accents. And what you get there is the sort of the authenticity of someone using their own accent, but also through that, a sort of an awareness of these actors who were all Jewish, where their families ended up, that they came through these stories. They had their grandparents or their grandparents or their great-great-grandparents experienced the same persecution, the same issues of assimilation that were driving the writers of the script, because the writers of the script, and obviously so much of what is in Fiddler, is both the stories that happened in 1905 and that experience of our grandparents or their grandparents, but also the anxieties of their lives as assimilated Jews in the 1960s, and the fear of further assimilation, the fear of people marrying outside of the faith, the fear of anti-Semitism never quite going away. It was their anxieties in as much as it also represents the real issues of the time. But the use of accent sort of shows, Jews ended up in Scotland, Jews ended up in America, and years later, here they are on stage together, telling these stories that are also their stories. This is not the Regent's Park, this is the Barbican production, but one thing I also wanted to mention is that in the Regent's Park production, one of the actresses playing one of the two youngest daughters, I can't remember if Sprinza or Bielka, was actually played by Toppel's granddaughter. So you had, again, even within this production, a wonderful nod back to the original movie, and Toppel, who was of course the sort of, for many of us, the great and be all and end all Tevier to end all Teviers. It's as wonderful as Adam is, and everyone else who played them, but Toppel is Tevier. And his granddaughter was here in the 60th anniversary production, which was fantastic. We're still talking about costumes. So there was this extraordinary wedding. A lot of the questions, when you do anything Jewish that's set in a time place, the first thing you are asked, and involves women who are religiously observant, is what is the deal with headscarves? I have had so many conversations about headscarves and head coverings over the years. It is a real topic of conversation. And there was how do we use the head coverings to represent both the sort of the sliding in of modernity, but also the fact that women of the time, whether they were Jewish or not, would have covered their hair for practical reasons. When you're working, especially if you're in the town, people did it out of respect. There's all sorts of reasons why women would cover their hair. But they also dug up this magnificent head covering, which is in a style I'd never seen before, which became the basis for the wedding dress that Saitel wears in her wedding. So this extraordinary head veil and the head covering with mazel tov on it that becomes part of the wedding scene. I think I have a photo later, but was also invoked through other inspirations, which we'll get to in a second. Also the costuming. So everyone who's seen the production has the first question they ask is why the rabbi's son's trousers so tight. So this is actor called Greg, who is playing the rabbi's son. This is him jumping as part of one of the dances. He was wearing extraordinary tight jeans as part of the costuming. His character is incredibly uptight. He's the one who thinks anyone who thinks women should learn is a radical, is there to sort of point out when Tevye's biblical quotes are wrong. And so he was dressed in these sort of very constraining trousers, which became a real point of conversation for anyone who saw the show. Why were his trousers so tight? No one else's was. And you have here also, I keep talking about Hodel, but because it's such a good example of how costuming was used to sort of show the character changes. We're at the wedding scene now, where famously she dances with Perchik in the mixed dancing moment. And here her clothing has become even more sort of non-gender conforming. She's wearing a sort of man's jacket. She's wearing she's sort of on her way to the trouser wearing scene, which she's wearing when she's leaving to get the train to Siberia. And you're sort of seeing this steady shift. And actually, as the play goes on and the children make their modern choices, their dress in some ways also becomes slightly more modern to represent that. This is the scene from the tavern, where you have the dancing with the Russians. You have the Russians dancing with Tevye, and it's that moment that is sort of, in some ways, I find the scene the most challenging in the whole musical. And when this scene where they are celebrating the possible wedding of Laser Walter Seitel, and the Russians come in to drink in the same tavern. And one fact that I found out that I will now never stop talking about when I was doing research to work with the cast and run a workshop for them is that in Poland, in this turn of the century, at the turn of the 20th century, 19th to 20th century, 70% of tavern owners in the region were Jews. And I had no idea that this was a Jewish profession, but apparently it was such a Jewish profession that there's a great Lithuanian poem. They're sort of a classic sort of, the equivalent to their Nobel poet laureate writing this poem. And it's the great epic poem of Lithuania. And in it, the character talks about going to a Jewish tavern, and he actually describes the tavern as a yankel, and describes the tavern as the building itself as looking like a praying Orthodox Jewish man. Because the association between tavern owners and Jews was incredibly intense, and it was a real meeting point between the non-Jewish residents of the village in Shtetl and the Jewish residents of the village in Shtetl. So in Fiddler, you have this moment where they're celebrating the wedding, but the Russians, led by Fiedka, who is an inherently decent man, but his friends are not, join in with the celebrations. And this particular moment, when I first saw this last summer, coincided with the Stockport riots in the UK, which you may have heard about, which was when there was a very awful, tragic incident where some girls were stabbed and killed at a dance class, and rumors spread that this had been done by an illegal immigrant. It got completely out of control, even though they'd apprehended the person who did it, and it ended up with days of riots in the town of Stockport and the nearby areas, in which locals were essentially turning on other locals, were attacking places where asylum seekers lived. were threatening mosques and other places of worship. And it was this real moment in which you saw the sort of fragility of this system, where you recognize this real moment in which neighbors can turn on neighbors so quickly. And this moment, and so for me, this tavern scene where everyone's celebrating together, and yet we know later on they turn and they commit pogrom against the same people that they were drinking with just a few weeks earlier, celebrating an upcoming wedding. How quickly that can turn, and the people next to you can turn against you, and it felt incredibly timely, incredibly evocative. And to me now, even months later, a year later, watching this scene, I get chills every time. I point this at you can see these sort of three guys in the middle here. All the Russians and the etiquette to the slightly to the left. So the Jews are the guys with the beards and the hats. And the Russians all have styling that I think is sort of best described as sort of 80s Freddie Mercury boiler suit era. Everyone's got moustaches and sort of bomber jackets. So there's this sort of nod back to sort of skinhead style, but also this sort of slightly more rebellious sort of 80. It's really fascinating what is done there, but you can sort of tell the Russians by their styling versus the Jewish characters. Let's go back out. Okay. This is a magnificent scene. So this is the dream scene. This is the moment in which she wants Seitel, he's promised Seitel she can marry Motel. He has to come out. This is from a Sarah. What they did in this production is it starts with the grandmother. So the actress who plays Seitel plays the grandmother and from a Sarah. So they start with the grandmother sitting. This whole thing is laid out as a giant sheet across the table. All the actors from the play are sitting behind it in a row. It is played slightly for comedic laughs in the way they act at the beginning, but then it turns to this utterly terrifying moment that sort of echoes stories, the Dybbuk and Jewish ghost stories, and everything that's sort of wonderful about Isaac Bashevis Singer's story, and that world of sort of lost Eastern European folklore, Jewish folklore. And she starts as a sort of the comedic grandma character, and then she goes under the giant tablecloth and comes out of the middle of it with suddenly this sort of makeup's been applied, and she becomes from a Sarah. And it is just extraordinary. The styling of it, the sort of the merging of the tablecloth, this moment of the tablecloth is both the bed that Golda and Tevye are sleeping under, and then it becomes the sort of the site of this wedding banquet, this ghostly wedding banquet that everyone's invited to, and then it becomes the shroud from a Sarah as she comes up through the middle of it. And it is just magnificent and scary and terrifying, and and it also becomes what you can't see in this picture is the corners of the tablecloth have become like the arms of this monstrous woman, and one of the actors is holding at the end sort of long pointed skeleton fingers that they're clawing at. So it's really quite amazing. And it very much echoes and deliberately echoes a lot of the styling of the Dybbuk, which is the great Yiddish expressionist film that came out in the early, I believe it's in the late 1920s. And this is the very famous wedding scene, which again also influenced some of the costuming for the wedding, in which the bride is dancing with the skeleton of the man she thought she was married who died. And it's this sort of skeleton Dybbuk character. The woman inside the skeleton is a famous Yiddish dancer called Judith Berg. She was an extraordinary expressionist Yiddish dancer. She survived the Shoah along with her husband. And they spent a long period of time after the Shoah touring around Poland and Russia and giving dance performances, Yiddish theatre performances to kids who were orphaned in the Holocaust and living in homes, and then had a long career in the US with her husband at the forefront of, and really was choreographed the scene and was inside it. And Judith Berg is hugely influential, I think, both in terms of this production, but also in the way that I think a lot of Jewish artists actually are thinking and creating, especially around choreography. today. But the Dybbuk, if you haven't seen it, you must see it. It's unbelievably brilliant and was hugely influential on that dream sequence. And again, you see here, like, again, much like in Fiddler, all the cast of the Dybbuk are engaged in the dance, and the community is sort of part of this hallucinatory experience that the bride is having, much like the cast is all involved in this sort of hallucinatory, magical experience that Tevier is describing and bringing Golda and the audience into in the dream sequence. And as I said, the choreography is extraordinary. It is created by this woman, Julia Chang. It is influenced both by Jewish expressionist dance movements, but also from Julia's own cultural tradition as a Chinese woman, and some of the fights and fluidity of that tradition as well. It's incredibly, I think it was described as sort of punchy and magnificent. It's extraordinary to watch. It is dynamic. It's amazing. Again, what you're seeing here in the bottom right with the women, that's from tradition. Instead of this sort of simpering sort of, or like, you know, classical musical style, there's a sort of an aggressiveness and a sort of joyousness to the way the women are dancing this tradition moment. It starts off with the, you know, and then it goes into this, like, you know, powerful, like these are powerful, strong women who are, you know, cooking, cleaning, they're making that under really difficult traditions, helping, you know, many of them would have worked in the same, you know, would have been helping their husbands do the butchery. They would have been, you know, they're milking the cows along with Tevier. They're doing the same things as the men's jobs and also keeping homes. And it just shows the choreographer really demonstrates that sort of extraordinary power of the women. And for an audience members to sort of see that and be able to be brought into that and recognize ourselves in these women was really powerful. This is the famous bottle dance. They did this dance obviously every night for weeks and weeks and weeks. They're doing it now at the Barbican. Not a single bottle has been dropped, and not a single bottle is stuck onto the hat. The bottles are free in the hats. There is a slight indent, but nothing more. And they have not dropped a single bottle. It is extraordinary to watch. This is it happening live. This is, of course, the iconic bottle dance. It has no historical basis. There were no, as far as I'm aware, no one has informed me otherwise. People did not do dances with bottles on their heads back in the shtetl. But it has become such a central part of the show. And this is the one piece of choreography, I think, that is rooted in the original choreography and really echoes the original choreography of the Broadway production and every production since. You can't do Fiddler without the bottle dance. You really shouldn't do Fiddler if you shouldn't do the bottle dance, the bottles are stuck on, because that loses some of the thrill of it. But not a single bottle dropped. It genuinely, every time I see it, is no less extraordinary, and is just, I feel like I'm on the edge of my seat every time watching it. And I think even more powerful for feeling. And again, this is a wedding celebration scene. And this entire time, this entire staging, the musicians have been on stage, and suddenly you're really feeling like you are at a wedding and you are at a celebration. You can see the musicians who would have traditionally played at every wedding. They are right there. And you as an audience want to get up and start dancing on the stage with everyone else. It's really pulls you in, and the frustration is that you can't. I want to end in this last few moments by talking about the music. What made this production really, really unique, as well as having the musicians on stage, is the fiddler. So in many productions of Fiddler on the Roof, the fiddler appears maybe at the beginning or maybe at the end. This fiddler is on stage every single time Tevier is on stage, and sometimes when he's not. The fiddler is like Tevier's like familiar, like he's just like, you know, a part of him. He's there at all times. He's on the roof sometimes playing. He's behind Fiddler. He's, you know, there's behind Tevier when Tevier's pulling his cart and sings "If I Was a Rich Man." The fiddler is sort of sitting on the cart and joins in at various points with his fiddle. You know, if Tevier is drunk after celebrating the wedding that will never be to his daughter and Nasal Wolf, the fiddler is also drunk on a cart behind him, drunkenly playing music with him. They are entwined, and the fiddler's sort of rise and decline and fall is along with Tevier's. And then they also do something, and he's played extraordinarily by a fiddler and an actor called Raphael Papo, who is usually based in Berlin and can often be found, I've been told, playing in underground clubs where everyone plays naked. So he's a naked fiddler in a basement in Berlin. But when he's not doing that, he's live on the West End stage, being absolutely magnificent. And this is actually his first, I think, major theatre role. And again, he was nominated for a Best Supporting Actor at the Olivier. So what a way to launch yourself. And what they do here in this production as well, that also roots it in a sort of fabulous modern place, is this is Hava. This is the actress who plays Hava, Hannah Bristow. She is a magnificent clarinet player. What they have done with the character of Hava is when Hava is outcast, she comes on and plays, when they sing Little Havila, she plays the clarinet alongside the fiddler. And what is happening in that moment is this sort of, there are multiple different ways to read it. I read it as just as the fiddler is a sort of a manifestation of Tevye's conversations with God, his need to sort of put an external part of himself out of the world, to see that reflection of his community and this character, the symbol of this shaky fiddler on the roof. Hava becomes this, Hava and her clarinet playing becomes also a sort of manifestation of Tevye's mistakes and the sort of the guilt he feels around casting his daughter out. She's become in some ways a sort of another fiddler, another element of his subconscious that is present. So she appears during Little Havila, but she also appears at the very end. The very, this is the final scene in the staging and in the play. So you'll see that the way it was staged at Regent Park, everyone leaves up this ramp. So the people from Anatevka leave first, and then gradually Golda, and then gradually Tevye walks away as well. The fiddler is also on that ramp, because what has happened, just as fiddler is leaving, just as Tevye is leaving Anatevka, so too does the fiddler leave with him. And what is left behind is Hava and the memory of the daughter he cast aside. And she is up there also. Now she is the clarinetist, the musician on the roof, also sort of playing them as this tradition crumbles around them. And she is, in some ways, the sort of the future and the representation of the issues and concerns that they will be dealing with when they reach America. So with that, I'm going to end here with just, I believe, enough time for questions. So Sherelle, should we...
You so much. Maybe if you can stop the share screen so people can see you, and you can choose a speaker view. We have quite a few questions, so I'll just jump into them, and I'll start with some things around the production. Was there security? Were there any protests around it? Were there any incidents around this production?
Yeah, so there was real concern that there would be, and they had, informed security, and there were all sorts of worries and concerns, and there actually was nothing. There was one small incident. So if you do go and Google it, you may find something. There is a cafe in Regent's Park next to the theatre that I think a man holding a Palestinian flag wandered into on a Friday afternoon to get a cup of coffee. And there were people in there who were going to see the play who believed that he was in there to protest, and started a conversation that got a little out of hand. At no point did that person come anywhere near the theatre, and the Regent's Park, having investigated it and did it, said it just one of those things that actually he just happened to be there. And naturally and understandably, everyone going to see it was feeling a little concerned and twitchy, and so that happened. So that actually there were no protests. There were no protests in the theatre. There were no protests outside of it. And I cannot tell you, I couldn't possibly begin to tell you why that wasn't the case. There have been other things, but I actually think that there is an understanding that this really is a Jewish story rooted in a time period, and that people have seen it from so many different backgrounds, and it's so universally known that the idea of protesting Fiddler on the Roof feels almost, no matter how extreme you are, feels almost beyond the pale in some ways. And maybe they just got lucky, but it hasn't happened at the Barbican either, which is a far more accessible venue than Regent's Park, which you really sort of have to go out of your way to walk to. There's no immediate tube station.
So, thanks. I'm going to ask two small questions and then get to larger ones. One was any of the people acting the Russians in the theater, were they Jewish? Were they not? And was there a conversation around that?
So they weren't Jewish. They're not Jewish. And what was amazing is that the people playing those characters and the constable, many of them have said to me afterwards how much they appreciated the fact that there was a Jewish consultant. So they were able to have those conversations, which actually helped them sort of get over some of their discomfort over the fact that their role was there to sort of threaten and persecute the Jew. They got to go on the same learning, have the same conversations, and be part of the same experience that everyone else in the cast was having, and be able to have those open conversations about anti-Semitism, about the space, about the experiences that we have. What was really weird is that there are two or three guys every night who are supernumeraries, who are literally, their role is to come on for sort of 5 minutes every night. They spend most of their time working on projects, and they come on for exactly 3 minutes a night with torches and sort of burn the village to the ground and beat up the Jews on the stage who are in the guys in program. One of them was played by a Jewish guy. And he said, my mother is so proud of me. Every night I come on for like 30 seconds, beat up a few of my country people, and then I go home. And I go to, so it was such a weird experience for them. But at the same time, because these conversations and there was, dialogue was encouraged and opened, they weren't made to feel like they were separate from the cast. And I think that was a really powerful thing as well. That for them, this was their introduction to the Jewish community, and they got to do it through a weird lens, but one that actually was sort of really empowering in how they understand and relate to their colleagues.
So you mentioned these conversations. Can you give us more of a taste of what does it look like? Do you sit with the cast and open up a conversation? Does it happen on set with the actors that suddenly brings something up? Can you give us a little bit more insight about that?
So I would run. I ran both the staff because I think that's really important, and that's what I loved about Regent Park, is that they understood that this wasn't just about the creatives and the company, but also about the people who would be working with the audience and working with anyone who came through. And again, the Jewish audience is only a fraction of the total audience that came. We're not that many in London and the UK, and yet they sold many, many tickets. But for the cast and creators, I ran a workshop and we explored the themes of Fiddler, the history and the culture, but that became the prism for which they could feel comfortable to ask more questions. So I've had conversations. I would often just go to rehearsals and sit there and be present. So I would have conversations with the costume directors about what it means to, about, the wearing the kittel under the chuppah, like that hadn't occurred to them before, and what the kittel means, and having those conversations. We had conversations about, as I said, about headscarves, but I would also have conversations with the cast about their fears before it opened, about where they're going to be security threats, and conversation with the cast represented views from people who are, Israeli and sit on the right of that, to Israeli and sit on the left of that, to people who are, representative British Jewish views and ideas around Israel, to people in the cast who hold anti-Zionist views. And this became, I was able to have conversations with people, and sorry, you might hear children screaming outside. There is a playground behind my house. So it's really sunny and lovely on a Sunday, just at the summer holidays. So please forgive the screaming children. They're having fun, I promise. And we'll be able to explore some of those issues that were coming up for them as they were entering into the characters. So anxiety, maybe people had their own stories about entering into interfaith relationships. I had conversations with people about their wedding. So it really became, I became a person that they could come to with their questions about. I also staged, I showed people how to light candles, and we had conversations around how you may or may not say a blessing correctly when you're in the context of, you might change language when you're doing something on stage, because some people don't want to hear the word of God said outside of a natural religious moment. And so all these things that would never normally have come up for the company and the creatives, they wouldn't necessarily have thought about that. They would have just read it from the script, and everyone was learning at every point. And it was just pick up the phone to me and ask me questions. There's a bit in the show where they say, can you is there a blessing for the sewing machine? And we had a whole conversation about what the blessing with the sewing machine would be. And I said, well, it's probably going to be Shechahianu. So in the first version of it, he did a whole thing. I taught the guy who played the rabbi, who was not like a secular Jew, to how to say the Shechahianu, and we did it, and it felt clunky. And I said, you know what? How about he just says Shechahianu typewriter? So now that's like a part of this particular production where he goes, of course there is Shechahianu typewriter, and everyone gets a laugh out of it. But it came out of like a real conversation about what are the actual blessings and what are the moments you have that just wouldn't have happened necessarily if they hadn't taken, hadn't consciously made this decision to have me on staff.
Beautiful. I'll end with a lovely comment question over here in the chat about the stage that, in addition to a sukkah, seems to represent also a cover or an opening of pages and books that are definitely kind of very easy to tie with people of the book. Was that something that was part of the thought?
I don't think it was, and I love that because I haven't thought about that before. So thank you to whoever came up with that. I will tell a different thing about books though, because there are books on stage. Like there are moments where the people running the props company were also Jewish, which was lovely. Propworks. That was a bit more of a coincidence. But they brought in these props in, including books and things that would be read. And then we had whole conversations around that. Like I kept walking around rehearsal rooms and sort of turning them the right way up because obviously people had just been moving them. It doesn't occur to them. And I was like, no, this is a prayer book. It needs to not be flat on its face. And here's a Torah. Let's have it the right way up. So everyone now knows how to stack books properly. But also they had all these books, and in a normal production, they might have just gone in a cupboard afterwards, or someone might have gotten rid of them. But there were real conscious decisions of like, we bought these prayer books and these books of learning. What can we respectfully do with them afterwards? Where can we donate them? We're not just going to put them in a bin or back in our cupboard. We want to make sure they're used. And again, things that just would not have been discussed otherwise. But no, I don't think it was ever intended the stage to look like a book. But of course, Tevier, who's for him, wealth is both monetary, but also the idea of being able to study and learn and have that time to do that, to sit in the Beit Midrash and be a wealthy man with nothing but books. It really is such a beautiful way of looking at that set. So thank you.
So a tiny question. There's a question, will or is there already maybe a video version of this production?
There is not. I have heard rumors it might go to Broadway, but those may just be rumors. There is if you go to, there is a trailer that you can watch so you can see glimpses of it as it's done live. If you go to, I believe if you just type in Fiddler on the Roof Barbican.
Receive it in the follow-up email.
It will be in the follow-up email, so you can watch the trailer and possibly some clips on YouTube.
And maybe I'll end just before thanking you with another beautiful comment in the chat, that it's interesting that this production, which is about tradition, broke away from a traditional Fiddler production in so many ways. It was very interesting to hear when you said about the bottle dance, there are things that can't be changed, and this whole production seems to be playing back and forth between tradition and
I do just want to say one thing on that, because maybe in pointing out the nuances, I might have also made some of the decisions seem sort of greater than they were. In many ways, this is a very traditional production of Fiddler. There have been productions of Fiddler where everyone's in modern dress. There's been productions of Fiddler where, the staging has been such that, they're in like a modern town and this is not that. This is rooted, it's taken elements and sort of ways, slight moments here to sort of help you as an audience member connect to the modernity within it. So elements of the dress and everything else, but they still ultimately look a lot like they're in a shtetl in the 1905. But it's those little things, those really conscious little things to sort of hint at the modernity, hint at the myriad identities which would have existed back then but just weren't spoken about, and to bring those to the fore that enable the audience to experience in this moment as their story, while also being very faithful, and it really was very faithful to the traditional production. But it's those moments that elevated it to this production that was just so extraordinarily well received, both by the audience and also by critics.
Rose, thank you very, very much for this beautiful presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in our next programs. And have a good day, evening, or night, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you all.